Hello, scholars. This is our Friday reading lesson. Our mini lesson today is tell something interesting you learned when you give a book talk about a book. Our goal today is I can share something interesting I learned. Friends, today we're going to focus on nonfiction stories or nonfiction books. We can also give nonfiction book talks, but it's going to be a little bit different. We have learned that nonfiction books are books about real people, places, and things. When we give a book talk about a nonfiction book, our checklist is a little different. Today, we are going to read a nonfiction book called Animal Tracks. As we read, think about anything new or interesting you learned. You can do this by noticing new words or something you haven't seen before in photographs and illustrations. So here are the 3 things on our checklist. Important information about the book. The title, of course, what is the book called? Something interesting you learned, what is something new? And something you like. Animal Tracks by Carmen Moret. An animal made tracks in the soft mud. Turn the page to find out who made the tracks. A bear made the tracks. The bear used its big paws to open a log and eat the bugs inside. Did you know that bears do this? So this is a new fact. I didn't know that they use their big paws to open up logs. So that might be an interesting thing that I share when I give my book talk. Who made the deep tracks? A deer made deep tracks. The deer ran fast through the grass on its hard hooves. Look at this label. Did you know this is what you call deer's feet? You don't call them paws, you call them hooves. If that's a new fact, something interesting, you could share that in a book talk. Who made the thin tracks? A bird made the thin tracks. The bird walked on the ground and pulled up a worm to eat. Who made the bumpy tracks? I made bumpy tracks with my boots. So, signs of animal life. Animal tracks aren't the only animal signs you can look for in the woods. So not just footprints. What else? Deer rub their antlers on tree trunks and leave scratch marks in the bark. Bears dig up roots to eat, and they leave holes in the ground. Shiny black crows shed their feathers in the summer. Keep your eyes open and you might see one of their dark feathers float past you on the wind. So any one of these facts, if those are new, that is something you can share in your book talk. So now it's your turn. I'm going to pause the video in just a moment, and I want you to try it out. The title of the book is I Learned That, and I Liked. So I will pause the video here. When you are done giving a little mini book talk to an adult or a sibling or a friend in the room, go ahead and click a thumbs up so we can begin our read aloud for today. Today we are going to read a book called The Elves and the Shoemaker by Paul Galdone. We've seen many different books by Paul Galdone. He didn't make those up on his own. These are stories that were first told long, long ago. Even before these books were written, the story was told to children. So this is another folktale.
The Elves and the Shoemaker by Paul Galdone. There once was a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, became so poor that at last he had nothing left but just enough leather to make one pair of shoes. He cut out the shoes at night so he could set to work on them the next morning. Because he had a good conscience, the shoemaker laid himself down in his bed and fell asleep at once. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, the shoemaker went to his workshop. There he found the pair of shoes made and finished, and standing on his table. He was very much astonished and could not tell what to think. He took the shoes in his hand to examine them more carefully. They were so well made that every stitch was in the right place, just as if they had come from the hand of a master workman. Soon a customer entered, and as the shoes fitted him very well, he paid more than the usual price for them. Now the shoemaker had enough money to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night and intended to set to work for the next morning with fresh spirit. But that was not to be, for when he got up, they were already finished. A customer soon bought them and gave the shoemaker so much money that he was able to buy enough leather for 4 more pairs. Early the next morning, he found the 4 pairs finished also. And so it always happened. Whatever the shoemaker cut out in the evening was finished by the morning, and soon he was making a very good living. One night, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out the shoes from the leather, he turned to his wife before he went to bed and said, "How would it be if we were to stay up tonight and see who it is that does this service?" His wife agreed and set a candle to burn. Then they both hid in a corner of the room and behind some coats that were hanging up. They peeked out between the coats and began to watch. As soon as it was midnight, in came 2 neatly formed naked little elves. They seated themselves on the shoemaker's table, took up the work that was already prepared, and began to stitch, pierce, and hammer the leather. The elves worked so cleverly and quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker's eyes could scarcely follow them, so full of wonder was he. The elves never stopped until all the shoes were finished and were standing ready on the table. Then they jumped up and ran off. The next morning, the shoemaker's wife said to her husband, "Those elves had made us rich, and we ought to show them how grateful we are. With all their running about and nothing to cover them, they should be very cold." She smiled. "I tell you what, I will make little shirts, coats, waistcoats, and breeches for them, and knit each of them a pair of stockings, and you shall make each of them a pair of shoes." The husband consented willingly, and that night, when everything was finished, they laid the gifts on the table, instead of cut out leather. Then they hid themselves so that they could observe how the elves behaved when they saw their presents. At the stroke of midnight, the elves rushed in, ready to set to work. But when they found the neat little clothes made just for them, they stood a moment in surprise, and then they showed the greatest delight. Quickly they took up the pretty garments and slipped them on, singing, "What spruce and dandy boys are we, no longer cobblers we will be." They hopped and danced about, jumping over the chairs and tables, and at last they danced out the door. From that time on, the elves were never seen again, but the shoemaker and his wife prospered as long as they lived. The elf.
All right, scholars. Let's draw to answer the question. Think about the plot. What happens first in the story? What happens next? What happens after that? and what happens last. So close your eyes and for 30 seconds, pretend you're skipping ahead in the video or the story to see what happens very quickly. Think about what happens after the shoemaker leaves out clothes. Draw a picture of what happens. So remember, your checklist, I added details to my character. In this story, you can add clothes, hair, maybe how they're feeling, the look on their face. The picture has a background. Think about where the story takes place. I colored my illustration. Did you just use a pencil? Go back and add some color. I labeled as many things as I could. There were a lot of things that you can label. And I sounded out my words. If you're thinking, I don't know how to spell shirt, sound it out. Shirt. This is the end of our reading lesson. Please make sure that you have an adult take a picture of your phonics worksheet with your reading comprehension down below, and you upload it to the Google Classroom.